Hello, I'm Toycat, and the UK has a new government under Keir Starmer, who has appointed a new cabinet and started passing policies already. The UK is changing, and that is possible because we have a new left-wing majority. It's not just a majority, they're not just larger than the Conservative Party, they're larger than all of the other parties in the House of Commons, including those who don't take their seats, put together, and then a substantial amount more than that. The Labour Party is so big that it could split in two, and they'd be the government and the opposition. This is something which is crazy to say, but it is something that's been possible, partially because Keir Starmer got more votes for the Labour Party, but in large part because the Conservative Party collapsed. They went from having, they basically lost half their vote and more than 2/3 of their seats, and they're at their worst result ever, leading of course to the current party leader, Rishi Sunak, resigning. This is a given in modern UK elections. When your party loses, you have to resign, because you can't say it's the electorate that's wrong, you have to say it's you that failed, at least at leading your party, and so someone else gets to take over and move the party in a slightly different direction. And most places that talk about these elections will talk about it in terms of personalities. Is it about anti-woke or anti-immigration, or is it about, all these sorts of issues they'll start to pick up on, and this is a fair way to see things, I guess, but I think there's a much more interesting issue in how a party goes from being opposition into being back to government, because of course that is their big goal as a party. They like to see themselves as the natural party of government, but that's the goal for any party, to become the government. And so how are they going to do it? There are actually 3 strategies that you have to pick as an opposition party that has failed, and it's very, very hard to decide which of those to go with after such a big election defeat. And this is where the Conservatives are right now. They are deciding which way they should go as a party, and there are 3 different options. One is to move to the right, one is to move to the centre, and one is to try to economise your existing votes in a new way. All 3 of these strategies are what I want to talk about today, because this is what the candidates are really arguing over. It's sometime later this year, there will be a new Conservative leader, and they will have to commit to one of these 3 strategies, and it's going to be fascinating to see which one it is. By the way, in case you're curious, the odds right now say that statistically, Kemi Badenoch has the best odds of being the next Conservative Party leader, and then Robert Jenrick, and then Tom Tugendhat, and then James Cleverly. And it's kind of interesting because if you were to briefly describe it, you could say that Kemi Badenoch is at least on the cultural right side of the party. You would be able to say that, like, okay, Tom Tugendhat is on the left side of the party, and so you've got like 3 very different strategies from the 3 most likely candidates, and so it's I think it's a great place to start with this. But yeah, let's go to a political spectrum briefly. Just ignore the fact that obviously politics doesn't perfectly work on a 2D spectrum. Politics is a very 3-dimensional thing, and there's multiple axes, and also, you know, that this is proven best by the fact that the Liberal Democrats are to the right of Labour in terms of how people vote for them or decide to vote for them, and in general they are to the right. But in this last election, it's pretty arguable that the policies the Liberal Democrats put out are to the left of the Labour Party, even though the people voting to those policies are to the right. It gets very, very confusing quickly when you actually start to conclude this, but I think this is just useful for helping you work out where a party can gain basically vote share from. The Conservatives need to get back up to ideally close to 50% of the vote share, but at the very least, if they want to win an election, they need more votes than the Labour Party has, which is something they need to do. From somewhere on this spectrum, they need to convince people who voted for something else or didn't vote to vote for them. So option number 1, the traditional move that's happened for all of my lifetime, is you move, so just again, to be clear here, technically speaking, the Conservatives can move themselves politically anywhere on the spectrum. They could become a far-left communist party, but that's likely to lead to the wipeout of the party, right? Like, they're not going to do very well if they become Trotskyists, because most of their voters are not that way. You can move a party slightly left or slightly right, but you do risk losing voters the further you move one way or the other. The goal is to maintain all of your existing voters while also somehow picking up new ones. And how do you pick up new ones? Well, the obvious first place that has been done all my life is you can move to the left. If you move to the centre, I guess I should say, yeah, towards the centre, move further away from the extreme wings, where because there are very few super far right voters to be had, there's very few super far left voters to be had, and most people coalesce somewhere near the centre, if not on every issue, then on some issues, right? Even if you have a very far left view on taxes or a far right view on taxes, you might have a more centrist view on immigration, or vice versa. This is, in fact, a very big reason why the Reform Party picked up so many votes, is because they can steal votes from Labour as well as the Conservatives, something which doesn't make too much sense given the left-right spectrum, but does make sense when you see politics as a 3D game. But again, we're using a 2D spectrum to keep this thing simple here, so you can move towards the centre and you'll pick up new votes that way, either from the Liberal Democrats or from the Labour Party. This is a really smart strategy, because if you can pick up votes from your opposition, if you can take some of those Labour votes over, then instead of having to gain 10% to match the Labour Party, I've really messed up my spectrum here, haven't I? But instead of having to gain 10%, so if you want to get new voters in to the Conservative Party, you need to get a whole new 10% in there to match the Labour. But if you steal, say, 6% of their votes, they go down to 28%, and you go up to 30%, and you can win an election stealing fewer votes from your opponents than from anyone else. This is the basic reason that we say there's a swing in politics. Taking voters from the opposition is the smartest way to get voters. However, you need to make sure you're not alienating your voters at a larger rate. But the strategy of this really does say that the reason this is so smart is because if you just take from the current government, if you take from the current largest party, then every voter you get up from them, you can lose up to 2 voters of your own, and it's a net gain. If the Conservatives lost all of their voters, right, all 24% just decide not to vote next election because they've gone too woke or whatever, if they decided to do that, but then they took just over half of Labour voters, that's still enough to have an overall majority. The Reform Party messes with that a little bit because obviously a lot of people will leave the Conservatives for them, but that is the traditional strategy. If there's no one to the right of you, if you are guaranteed a monopoly on your side of the spectrum, the further left you move, the further to the centre you move, the more votes you'll pick up and the better you'll do. And so that is how the Conservatives can move to victory, and that's going to be one of the pitches that people will make. It's how they won from opposition last time. David Cameron moved the party towards the centre, it's more socially liberal in favour of gay marriage and a lot of other weird things like that, and it didn't lead to them winning, but it led to them becoming the largest party, something which I think you would agree is good if you were a Conservative politician. And so the next goal that you could go for, if you say that's not possible because we don't want to become Labour, or you just say realistically, if we do that, we'll hemorrhage voters to the Reform Party, and they genuinely might overtake us. There is only a 10% gap between the Conservatives and the Reform, and so you could argue the opposite strategy is to go on the defensive. If all of these Reform voters clearly want a right-wing party of some form, and they don't believe that the Conservatives are that, and so what do you do with a party that, how do you do that? Well, if you just go right where they are, if you park your tanks on their lawn in political terminology, then all of those Reform voters would say, well, if there's a major party that already wants to do what we're doing, well, then that would be great, wouldn't it? Why would we vote for the Reform Party if there's an actual party with a slightly higher chance of becoming government going in instead? And so that is the second place that you can move as a party. If you just add, without having to do anything else, if you can just add the Reform total to your total, then between the two of you, you have enough to beat Labour and become the next government. No new voters from the left side of the spectrum or the centre of the spectrum have to be convinced. All you've got to do is say, look, we are going to win, we're going to go right wing and we're going to win this. And that is something which the Reform Party are basically aiming for. It has been said by Nigel Farage, the current leader of the Reform Party, that he basically wants to reverse takeover. He believes, again, I don't think this is an unfair thing to say, that if you look at Nigel Farage, he left the Conservative Party because he believed that they weren't Eurosceptic enough. And he believes that they're not a true Conservative Party, in part because of the move that I mentioned under David Cameron, where they moved further and further socially left, even though there's a lot of voters like him who are slightly further right than that. And so what do you do about that? Well, you say to the Conservative Party, yeah, we're going to take this thing over. You will abide by our values, and maybe even, as the odd checker suggests, he is currently, what is this, like 8th in favourite? What sort of a situation do you ever get where the 8th favourite for your party leader is the leader of another party? Well, it's still 20-1 to be clear. It's not going to happen, but the fact that enough people think that is because he's actively said, yes, I will take over the Conservative Party if it ever comes to it, right? You guys can join us, we can merge, we can do something like that, but you are moving to the right because I am going to convince people that's where they lie, and this is the whole populism spectrum thing. He has done a very good job of convincing people to vote for the right, just not in the way the Conservatives would like, in the way that he specifically would like, his brand of right-wing politics, which is very, very successful. So you need to work out a way to get these two parties together, which is hard given, it probably will lose you some voters to go full reform. And so this is the struggle the Conservative Party has, politically speaking. You can stay exactly where you are and just hope the Reform Party or the Liberal Democrats or the Labour Party fizzles out. That is a valid way to just hope, I guess. But if you want to actively do something, you've got to decide left or right or something. You've at least got to decide which voters you appeal to more. You don't have to move your policies as much as your messaging, you might be able to say cynically. And so if you're going to do that, which way do you appeal your messaging to? To the Reform voters or to the Labour voters? That's a hard one, and that's one that they have to decide on. But there is a third way. The third way is interesting because, this is often, this is what was describing the idea of moving towards the centre. It's the political, the reason that worked so well in big elections like, the 1992 election, the reason it worked works so well to move to the center is, like I mentioned, it's politically very smart to take votes away from your opponents. But if we use the United States, which is probably the world's most followed election system, in 2008 they lost against Obama, and then they lost against him twice in a row using fairly moderate candidates. I know if you're in the US, you're probably like, oh no, he had this really right-wing stance, but like this is a guy who literally had basically universal healthcare for his state, right? They're moderate candidates for the Republican Party at the very least. Give me that, right? And then how did they go from losing against a Democrat using their moderate candidates? The wild idea was moving surprisingly to the right. This is something which doesn't make sense on the old way of like, well, every 2 voters you take from the opposition is the equivalent of losing. Every 1 voter you take from the opposition is the same as gaining 2 voters somewhere else. Instead of throwing down its head, basically the way this was won is, if you look at it, he won with fewer votes by working out that you just need to win in some seats, playing the game smarter, not harder, basically, rather than trying to really, tactically do things the way it's been done. Instead, trying to win a few votes in, the key states where it matters, by winning in, it's such tiny majorities in some places too, by winning very, very small amounts, literally 10,000, is that literally, yeah, that's 11,000 votes in Michigan. I think it's even fewer, when you get to like Wisconsin and places like this. But there are very, very, very small majorities in some states, and that is enough to win. This is something I know that, this is a divisive figure, Donald Trump is, but the idea of playing playing the game the way it is actually laid out, which is not get the most votes to win, but instead it is win in the most constituencies, which is what Keir Starmer did with the Labour Party in this election too. Like I mentioned, he gained 1.7% of the vote. They went from historic loss to historic victory, and you can claim that down to the Conservative Party to a large part, but also it's down to tactically working out where to get the votes, and those votes need to be in the places like this, the big center of the country, as well as the northwest and northeast. But the places in the country where they are the most marginal are the places they need to get the votes, not the places that are traditionally supporting them. This is a wild stance to take because it basically says, yeah, I want to get voters who are either not voting right now, ideally that would be great, or I want to get the voters not from any particular side of the spectrum. I don't want to get the most voters, winning 38%, but winning 35%. 11% more voters is what you need to do if you're the Conservatives right now. But if you're actually trying to target it, if you do the electoral maths, and fun fact, you can do that, you can say, yeah, we just need to win, if you were being like really scientific about it, we need 16 votes to win Hendon. Any more than 16 votes that we win in Hendon, it's a waste. We need 18 votes in Poole. Any more than 18 votes, they're wasted. And if you really wanted to be tactical, the only number of votes you would need to win are every single one of these seats by the exact majority you have. And so really you need to be targeting, if you're the Conservatives, and you need, 205 seats right now. So we scroll that over to here, and 205 is Guildford. You need to win Guildford, and then you need to say anything past, I don't know, Luton North. Luton North being on this low down is actually surprising, but anything past Luton North, you say, we don't care about your votes. We will actively lose your votes. We'll make you hate us if you have to, because we don't care about the votes in Luton North. Just to interject, by the way, Future Toy Cat here, to mention that, by the way, Luton North, I know I shouldn't be slandering the place that clearly is the home of the best kebab voter. It's not a true democracy unless you listen to the people who want to hear that it's best kebab o'clock right now. What is that meant to mean? The important thing to say is you might be thinking, yes, that is in Luton, and so clearly this needs to be listened to, even if it's only the 221st seat target. However, looking on the map that you can see on the Wikipedia pages for these, Luton North doesn't cover Best Kebab, which is found over here, and that instead is in the Luton South and South Bedfordshire constituency over here, which, as you'll see on the target list, is within that 210 or so limit, and so as a result, you can see that Luton South, the Best Kebab voters, are still worth aiming for. But to go more seriously here, to be electorally smart means, interestingly, in some cases, you have to make counterintuitive decisions in terms of whose votes you should be going after. In an ideal electorate system, you should care about getting as many people to vote for you, really ideally, as no matter where they lived. But in the system that we have, it doesn't matter, how many people vote for you. It matters where those people are located, and the best places are all of these. And then, to go fair on this one, there's also a defensive strategy, which is to argue, well, we could be wiped out in all of these seats too. There are no longer any conservative Conservative safe seats, there's an argument that Rishi Sunak's seat and maybe 4 or 5 others are safe-ish, but there is all it takes is another 5% swing away from the Conservatives, and they won't even be opposition anymore. So there's an argument you could only care about these voters. You could just say, okay, basically everything here beyond, say, 50 seats in, anything beyond Lowestoft is lost, and you could just say that I'm not even going to care about the people in Burton, the Best Kebab voters, the Dudley people. No one cares about the people of Dudley, and so why should the Conservatives? You could make this argument that you can play defensively too, but there is still a point that these are the most tactical places to get people to vote. It's also worth mentioning, this is a little bit of a less enjoyable strategy, but it's something that is relevant with 2020 on people's minds, because interestingly enough here, you don't need to win with the majority of votes, of course, like I've mentioned before. That's not a key requirement for it, but even more interestingly is in the same way that I mentioned that if you win a vote from the opposition, that counts as winning 2 for yourself. Well, if you don't win a vote from the opposition, but you can convince them to stay home, then that still counts as a vote for you too, in the weird 2-party system at the very least. Obviously, the Conservatives are so low that that's not a perfectly viable strategy, but to win all of their target seats, interestingly enough, they don't need to convince the people of Poole to vote for them. They don't need to convince the people of Dorset South to vote for them necessarily. They just need to convince 1,048 other people not to vote for Labour. And how do you do that? In part, this kind of comes back to the political compass of managing to move to the right maybe slightly, or move to the left slightly, but without convincing the other people to vote against you. This is some of the kind of genius of it. If you can convince, one of the reasons that the Labour Party saw so much success is due to the fact that there was a reduced turnout. People thought the election result was more or less guaranteed, and they didn't fear the Labour Party as much as they had in 2017 or 2019, for example, where there was this huge concern amongst both players about what the other side was going to do. If you can just convince the opposition that you're no big worry, that is a surprisingly effective tactic, combined with gaining a very small number of votes and redistributing those votes to key seats. And so that is what the Conservative Party more or less needs to do right now. So sure, the odds might say that some people are going to get in, but I think the actual strategy behind it is working out whether to move left or right, I guess on some level, but also on the third level is how do you work out being non-offensive to Labour voters while also being appealing to Reform voters? How do you pick up Lib Dem voters and Labour voters and Reform voters and ideally non-voters, or at the very least, in a probably concerning move at the level of turnout we have right now, how do you convince enough of those voters to stay home that even convincing the exact same number of people this time is enough to win it? These are the questions that the party has to answer. How do you pick up votes from all 3 parties, or pick up votes from none of them? And that is why the Conservative Party is going through a bit of a time right now. I do think that it's a very interesting world where this is kind of the fun thing, right? One of the reasons that the Labour Party can do quite well in weird politics of 2024, it's more viable for the right wing to pick up, say, a black woman candidate, and it's more viable for the left wing to pick up a straight white male candidate. If we want to go identity politics, which is a weird split second here, and that is an interesting little tidbit behind basically every candidate besides from the centrist wing of the party, and that is a weird electorally viable strategy because, again, I feel like, and you know, I think it's something that just has to be mentioned here is a little bit, and it's a very weird bit about how electoral politics works, but that is why, if you look right here, that is what's going to happen. And so, in the UK, we are going through a bit of a weird time for opposition, but basically, if you're curious as to when the next UK election is, it could be as soon as, like, next month. It could be held as early as, I think it might be a 6-week campaign period, so it could be the very end of August if for some reason Keir Starmer's like, nah, I want to do it again, but like the actual laws are, it has to be no later than the 15th of August 2029, because you get 5 years plus those 6 weeks campaign period. And so will we have an election in the next couple of years? Probably not. The real tester will be the local elections of next year, will be the London mayor elections, the other mayor elections across the UK. There are lots of other mini elections that will be the time teller, but the Conservative Party has 5 years, and so I actually think if I can add a tiny bit of political analysis of my own into this video, I think that there is actually some smarts, regardless of whether it would pick up any people like me, the voters that Labour doesn't care. Sorry, the voters that neither party cares about because they're in London and they're so safe Labour anyway. I feel like you don't need to pick up votes like that right now. There is probably an argument that with a 5-year time span, it's worth playing defensive, picking up a candidate who can shore up the Conservative vote, and then at some point before an election, either with those candidates or with another candidate, move towards the centre and move more electorally smart. Because yeah, you've got years to actually worry about which constituencies need the votes. You do need to be worrying about the people of Norfolk South West, or of the cities of London and Westminster is weirdly one of the ones here, but Monmouthshire and Congleton and Banbury and all these fake sounding places. You do need to pick up their votes and worry about them, but right now you don't need to worry about whether they're going to vote or not vote. You just need to worry about making sure that your existing coalition stays strong, and then maybe build on that later. Because that is the real thing that isn't being mentioned here, is that you almost might worry about 24% is at the point where you might go so low that you might lose unless you can convince all of those 24% that backing you last time was the right decision, weirdly enough. Anyway, with that said, I do believe that's the correct move. If you, on a political level, is you basically, with such a large swing, you can't do that by just making one politically savvy move, left, right, center, non-voters, on the populist axis, whatever. You basically can't do that in a single election. Even if you have Nigel Farage take over your party, I think that you still have a huge struggle about how you connect with voters. But that's a problem for them to worry about over the next 5 years. And in the meantime, we'll be seeing what the Labour Party gets up to as the new UK government. They've been doing a lot. I feel like the new Prime Minister's been making a lot of relations around the world, making some very interesting moves with regards to Northern Ireland, I think in particular. I would love to talk about all of those, but first, I think we're going to talk about the political spectrum finally, because this is not the correct way to describe politics in the ultimate terms, and a lot of people will agree, people disagree about why this is incorrect for lots of reasons, so let's talk about that probably in the next video. There's no elections happening for a bit, so we should be good on that. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you're looking forward to the new leader of the opposition, because they might be one of these people. Or, I think realistically, like, every time someone wins the Conservative leadership election, with the exception of Rishi Sunak, who came second and then was elected unopposed, which basically the party said, oops, what did we do there? With the exception of that, the winner of the party leadership election basically doesn't run in the one before. You can see, there are very, very few exceptions. Liam Fox came third in 2005 and then came, fifth in 2016. It's very rare that you run for leadership of the party and then actually, you lose the first time round, then actually succeed another time. David Davis is another famous Conservative. He ran a lot of times, and he never quite won it. I think he got pretty close in 2005. But yeah, the point is, in the Conservative Party in particular, if you've lost an election already, then why should we choose you now? And that is why I would add some skepticism of it being Kemi Badenoch, because this is a ridiculously long article. If you look through here, you can see that she was the fourth place candidate. The third place candidate is not in existence anymore. The first place isn't as well, and the second place can't be leader. So she's the logical choice right now, but that's not how Conservative Party elections actually go. So it's going to be someone you haven't heard of who's going to be the next leader of the opposition. Or maybe it will be Kemi Badenoch, and I'll be wrong. With that said, though, hope you all enjoyed this video. For another fun fact before I leave here, I made a bet on the US presidential election. Because, people always say, like, Toycat, you're British, you have no stake in this. So I made a bet, and it will be fun. Next time we talk about US politics, it'll come up relevantly. Anyway, with that said, thank you for watching. Second channel, don't care. Subscribe if you want to, or don't. Or give me money. Actually, I care if you do that. I love me a good lobster roll. Patreon.com/Toycat. But either way, have a good day, and I'll see you for a political spectrum video soon. Goodbye.